Battle Princess Madelyn is a retro-inspired action platformer from Casual Biz Games. While a lot of games use the retro excuse to give really terrible artwork and, really blocky graphics, this actually has really good graphics and the actual action platforming is pretty good, so it's an actually fun game to play. Now the game comes in two modes and you might want to be a bit dubious over which mode you want to start with because it's a hard choice. At the top there's arcade mode and just below that there's story modes. Now I had a bit of a quandary myself when starting out and I figured that maybe that the arcade mode would just be, a level select essentially and play a level and then, just play through that, and it would be better to play the story mode, which would, as I would have imagined, would have been all of the levels in a story sort of situation. But that's not actually the case. The case is that arcade mode is, as the name would suggest, and not as, most games seem to take it, it would be like an arcade cabinet sort of style, so truly retro. So you start off in one area and you work your way through the zones, and there's 10 areas with 5 zones in each and a boss. Well, the game claims that each of the stages have 5 areas each, but through my playing of the arcade modes, I noticed that there are 2 stages and a boss in each of the 10 areas, so that's not actually the case whilst it claims that on the store. So I don't know if they changed that and they removed some areas or what, but there's definitely not 5 stages in each area. So you go from left to right with different weapons in those zones, and you can pick up armor upgrades in the levels and find secrets. And the arcade mode, I'd say, is the definitive mode to play because that's how the game's been designed to be played, and it's the most fun and has the most interesting experience. I chose to go through the story mode, believing that would be the main mode to play. However, it's been a bit bugged and there's been a few things that have been changed. Now, bear in mind that they have made updates to fix a lot of the bugs, so they've addressed a lot of the issues. For example, there was one major bug, which was that you couldn't even hand in some of the side quests from finding villagers, and that prevented you going into some of the boss areas, which prevented you finding all of the pieces of the Stitch bot which were required to open the second half of the game. So that was a fairly major bug. Some of the other changes that they've made is that they made the areas a lot easier to transition early on, because before you even get the double jump ability, you had to jump over one of the gloves, which was pretty much a pain in the ass, and the actual double jump ability was kind of hidden for a lot of people, so, it was not as obvious where it was. So now they've put it out in the open in a big well that's like, go down here for this hidden extra ability. So, they made that a lot easier. And then some of the other areas that were difficult to transition, like the waterfall, where after defeating the boss, you're teleported back to the start of the area without any opportunity, even though Sundav's like, don't go back before activating the teleporter stone. And, well, you're already automatically transported back, so you don't get to do that. Now again, because of some of these issues, they've made extra things so that you can actually just teleport back to the nearest teleporter stone that you've already activated, and that makes traversing around the game a lot easier in the story modes. Saying that, there are still a couple of bugs that are still in the game. From major to inconvenience. So I'm going to bring these up expecting them to be addressed, that's the whole reason to do it. So expect that by the time you get to play the game, these no longer occur. One, the first major bug is that Fritz's power is actually linked to a pogo ability that you don't get until pretty much the end of the game. And so you go through the entire game never getting his sidekick ability, which you are supposed to have. So, you get these runestones to give him extra powers, but the powers don't actually activate until you get the pogo ability. And whilst the developer has suggested you can activate cheats from the start, that defeats the purpose of the point of playing this sort of game mode though, right? Just having everything unlocked from the beginning. So I don't agree with that. If there's a bug there where you're not getting the powers until late game, you should really get that fixed, in my opinion. And also, another one that's a fairly inconvenient bug is that when you're climbing on things, you can't throw your melee projectiles. It might be that when you're fully upgraded that, you can fire projectiles off, but for the most part of the game, when you're not upgraded, and you don't get to upgrade until at least halfway through the game, because the hammer to get the guy to unlock his shop to upgrade your armour and your weapons is halfway through the game, and by that point it's like, well, was it really worth it? And you can upgrade everything to maximum, where there are incremental upgrades that you pay for, so, having this unlock earlier might have been a bit better, so you could have, like, incremental stages of upgrading your armour or your weapons, and, some sort of quandary, rather than just going, oh hey, I've got a lot of money, let's just spend it all on everything and get everything fully upgraded. So that's just something that I'd say. But yeah, not being able to throw your weapons off the side of projectiles when you're clinging onto these pillars, it's a bit of a pain. So that's kind of inconvenience, and it's a bit awkward to work around, but hey, that's just another thing that I would bring up. But other than that, the game's pretty fun, and I didn't mind the challenging platforming areas. Actually, it was just the fact that you couldn't hand in one of the quests to get the actual boss keys, and I was looking for the statues to pray down to, expecting them to be the boss keys, because that's where it had been up to that point. But it turns out that you can get it through side quests, through either missing NPCs, because, in the water area I couldn't find the NPC that was reliable for that part of the thing. And then in the later area, with the fire area, it was just that it wasn't accepting the quest. So, I'd completed the quest, and I was talking to the NPC, and he was just like, have you found my friend yet? No, I haven't found a friend. But actually, I have. I just didn't know that it was your friend, because, the actual quests was bugged. But even saying that, though, even though there are still a couple of issues with the story mode, and it's now playable all the way through, and the bosses have a good variety, so, when you're fighting the bosses, they do have a lot of different mechanics, and you can learn in the retro sort of style their attack patterns to maximise your chances of winning, and so, even with, lowest upgraded abilities and, just one-hit armour, you can still get through the game, but it's more like you're feeling you're doing like a minimum effort run, and you do feel like halfway through the game you should have had at least one upgrade for your armour by then. But it turns out that, hey, no, you couldn't have possibly found the hammer by then, so no, you're not getting it till the very late game. But again, as I was saying, whilst I thought that the arcade mode would be interstitched with the story modes, you have much smaller areas, so whilst there are still the 10 zones, they're pretty much 2 to 3 screens at most, and it's not the same. It's definitely not the same as the arcade modes, and it does feel like the arcade mode is the mode that it's meant to be played in. And if the game had just been released with only the arcade modes, they wouldn't have had all of the negative reviews and stuff that they've had with the issues that they've had with the story modes. And like I said, they are working on it, and they're fixing the issues. They fixed a lot of them, but there are still a couple that are still standing there that, people might not even know, because if they haven't even got that late in the game, they wouldn't even know that Fritzy is meant to be doing things, especially if they haven't even played the pre-alpha or even the arcade modes, and, things like that. And the game itself, I would say, even if it had just been released with just the arcade modes, for the price range and the amount of game that you've got in it, and the fun of the game, and, the actual gameplay mechanics, when they're done right, once you've got all the powers and everything's working right, it feels good. And the arcade mode definitely feels like it's more the way it should have been played. So I do feel like I made a bad choice by picking the story mode, because it definitely feels like it's designed to be played in the arcade mode rather than the story mode, when, controversially, you would think, well, story mode, surely that's the definitive way of being played. But no, it's been designed to be played in this arcade style, and I think that, if it had just been released just as that alone, it would have done so much better, and, it's still a good price range for that. So, yeah, it's definitely a good game, and, don't be down on it because the story mode has some issues that still need to be addressed. So, whilst I bring these up, they are just to, as I say, get things hopefully improved in that sort of sense. But again, for the price range, if you just know to go into arcade mode and play that, then, do that first and, consider story mode afterwards, because arcade mode is the definitive way to play it, the left to right of all the areas, to fighting the bosses, to transitioning through the game with the armor pickups and, already having double jump and the pogo ability in your arsenal, and the areas having their own individual weapons and still secrets to be found, and, the more challenging platforming and more enemies and much more fun, much more of the fun is in the arcade mode, so I'd definitely suggest you go into that. And the game and the enemy designs has partially been also influenced by one of the developers' daughters, so that all the enemies and the bosses have all been thought up by the developer's daughter, and it is a small team, so it's worth bearing that in mind as well. So you can't necessarily guarantee full everything like a AAA sort of title would have going, but they've done pretty well, and the game is really good. So it's a fun game, it's a fun action platformer. I just suggest that you stick to the arcade mode to begin with, and get all your fun out of that, get your gameplay out of that. It took me about 9 hours to get through the story modes. Bear in mind that there have been changes and there were bugs where I was running about trying to find things because you just couldn't hand in the quests and you couldn't complete the game at that point. But that's been addressed. You can at least get through the game and complete the game now, so that's a big thing, and it's very playable and it's very fun. So I definitely recommend giving it a go.